but just to have that there. And we'll move on up. This topic came up as we are entering and going through some definite unrest, and want to make sure that we can elevate voices and bring on conversation to assure that as we are moving forward in this time in civil unrest and racial unrest, COVID, and there's a whole lot on our plate, and we need to work as a community to move forward and try and make the change for everyone. We also do want to recognize our colleagues at Milwaukee Police Department and the district attorney. We do work very closely with MPD3, Captain Norman, his community prosecution unit, which includes the district attorney, Jessica, and then they have a community liaison officer, Officer Cavazos. They're very, very valuable members of our Near West Side partner team, and we do continue to work with them and want to make sure that we all can just have conversation. I'll read one little bit that I did say. It is our goal to initiate dialogue about community policing, and we want to be sure to recognize that police department, it's an honor and a privilege to work with them. And what we're really trying to do here is collaborating and continue positive dialogue to create a healthier and better understanding of people, of each other in our community. So thanks again for joining us, and we will get started. So I will introduce our speakers. We have Cassandra Liebel, Thomas Thaddeson, and Stu Braze. And we will get started with, I'm sorry, tell me how to pronounce your last name correctly as you reintroduce yourself, Stu, and about your background and why you're interested in community policing.
Sure, Stu Braze, and glad to be here this afternoon. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, but I've been in Milwaukee since 2007. I was a city police officer in Indianapolis, ran an intercity beat car in my time there. And I've had some great conversations with Keith over the last few years as we've got to know each other about approach to policing and just a general conversation. So happy to be here this afternoon.
And Thad, I think,
Yes.
Oh no, Cassandra's next on the agenda. Apologize. Cassandra, would you please introduce yourself?
No problem at all. Yes, Cassandra Liebel. I just recently retired from the Milwaukee Police Department at the rank of captain. So after 25 years serving in a variety of capacities, patrol, investigations, and training, I've since retired and moved on to work with the county now in emergency management.
Great, thank you for joining us. And Thad, how about yourself?
My name is Thad. I'm a 25-year retired professional with the City of Milwaukee Police Department, having worked particularly in the area of community policing in the Avenues West area that currently serves the Near West End Partners location. I've also been active in the community and worked in conjunction with a lot of politicians and community leaders within the city. So I had at least a little voice as to what's going on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it all. So what we'll do is I'm just going to ask, we'll do a little round table panel with you three. And my question is, what is community policing and how did it change your approach to being a police officer? Thad, would you mind going first?
Well, sure. Community policing is an effort of trying to establish a partnership with the community in regards to policing in such a way that the public can actually gain trust with the police. My approach as a professional starting out back in it was 25 years ago, was introducing the process of community policing in the Marquette areas through Avenues West.
Okay.
That whole process and theory was based upon policing policies such as the broken windows theories and different things that polices were giving as a method of training to try to implement in order to solve crimes and prevent crimes from happening. But I think as it progressed to this day, a lot of the issues of policing or community policing has less to do with the policies and procedures than as much as does with the trust that the community has with the police. And I think the recent uprising and insurgencies is primarily indicative of the lack of trust that a lot of people have with the police department, which kind of makes community policing a little more difficult today than it was in the past.
We lost you, Barb.
Yep.
I told you, I talk with my mute on. Apologize. Cassandra, do you mind telling us about your community policing experience and how it's impacted you?
Sure. I would start by saying that actually I think I have a kind of a unique perspective when it comes to community policing, in that I don't really, actually, I wish we would move away from the whole concept of community policing, because when we start with that narrative, it implies a separation of police in the community. And for me, that's the opposite of why I joined law enforcement. I'm from the city of Milwaukee. I was born in Chicago, but raised here in the city of Milwaukee, educated here in the city of Milwaukee, lived here in the city of Milwaukee. And so for me, it was just a natural progression to join law enforcement and try to help my community be better, try to help my community be safer. So when it comes to community policing relations, that was, like I said, it was just an extension. So ironically, when I worked in District 3 as a brand new officer, some of the areas I patrol were my areas that I grew up in. So I would be driving in a squad car and I would have people calling out and waving to me because they knew me from school or they knew me from the neighborhood prior to me joining. So for me, there wasn't a conscious decision to engage in community policing. It was just an extension of my existence within that community. And so, like I said, done a lot of things within the department, but one of the things that I really enjoyed was when later on I became a captain, I oversaw our Office of Community Outreach and Education. And that was a huge push for us to do a lot of community collaborations with organizations to try and rebuild the trust that Thad talked about, where we really want the community to see themselves within law enforcement, because I think representation matters.
And Stu, how about yourself?
I certainly appreciate Thad and Cassandra's comments. I agree with them. And I think I've been removed from the department for a number of years, but I think community policing has always been pretty much a consistent approach. It's really a partnership between the police and the community. It's at a beat officer's level. It's you get to know the shop owners, the folks that live in the communities, the neighborhoods, watch people. If you had businesses and you had churches, you get to know the religious order. So it was just really the opportunity for police officer to become very familiar with the neighborhood that they were policing, and really working hand in hand with the residents and again, the business people, to make sure that there was a trust factor, as Thad talked about, that you knew who people were, they knew who you were, and that was really more of an opportunity to create that trusting relationship, which was really kind of the desired state.
Thanks. Either one of you, any other comments about community policing before we move on? No? Okay, no. Great. Thank you. And do remember, folks that are tuned in, we do have the chat box. So if you have a specific question, pop it in there and then we will address that at the end. And now we're going to go and just let each panel member answer a separate question. And we will be starting with Thad. So Thad, my question to you is, what can we do to improve police and community relations?
Well, that's an interesting question, because you can want to do certain things and the ability to do certain things may not be as easily surmised. For example, one of the issues with community policing is predicated on the resources that are available to many of the police districts. There is overriding demand for calls for service that typically have officers who are assigned to certain locations to go from one assignment to another assignment to another assignment. And oftentimes the opportunity to take the time to engage with the community isn't readily available. And it suffers due to the lack of resources or manpower in order to effectively do community policing. So in that case, when you say, what can we do to improve community policing, is that, well, we either have to increase manpower, dedicate specific people to do just those individual tasks, and engage in public in a way that we can restore the trust that they have to want to even work with police officers on the long run. So it's a kind of a catch-22 kind of situation. I think it's a preponderance of the philosophy of the department itself to engage those officers to elicit them to want to be a part of the community and go out and reach out towards the community that they serve, as opposed to just going to an assignment and then, you know, not engaging with it. So it really takes a lot for the individual officer to take on his own initiative to try to reach out to that store owner, that neighbor, that's one person that they deal with, and engage and create a relationship with them. Other than that, it's just business as usual. It's just one assignment after another assignment after another assignment. And as much as you want the change, it's not going to happen because you don't have time to engage.
Stu or Cassandra, would you like to offer a little opinion or add on to that?
I certainly, I mean, I think that Thad's comments are right. I mean, if somebody, the idea of policing a neighborhood and being a consistent individual that people get to know, if you're not there and you're shifted around, is going to create problems. You know, I think the other part that we run into is, you know, I think there has to be a better job of recruiting from the neighborhoods into the department. I mean, I think we've got to find candidates who grew up in neighborhoods, who know the people, who know the community, who, you know, who should desire to become, as Cassandra pointed out, she grew up in the neighborhood. She became part of that neighborhood. She policed that neighborhood. They knew her. That's the kind of thing that I think we have to get back to. Unfortunately, I think whether it's residence requirements or whatever, you're starting to see a lot of recruits being brought in who didn't grow up in the city. They didn't grow up in Milwaukee, and they're being brought in and they're asked to police in situations they didn't grow up with. They're not familiar with it, and it creates problems without the appropriate kind of training and support behind them. So I think it's a couple of different issues that I would kind of add on to Thad's comments.
Cassandra, anything you'd like to add?
No, absolutely, I agree. Touching on the recruiting issue, I think that it is very indicative of the type of policing that you receive based on the candidates you have. And so I remember anecdotally as a young recruit traveling with my FTO, and my FTO, who happened to be a middle-aged white male, was just kind of wondering why. Oh, he saw someone walking. He goes, why didn't you think that was suspicious? And I said, because it's not, you know, from where I come from, that's not suspicious, you know? And so there was just that disconnect, that what he viewed from a police perspective, not having grown up in that neighborhood, seeing a lot of foot traffic, he thought was suspicious because we saw the same individual walking over and over again in an area. But I understood from growing up in that community that I would walk to the store. That was part of my social life, you know, to be seen, to be out. So it was just a different perspective to have. So I think that's where recruiting from the community, like Stu said, you're getting people who understand that dynamic and understand some of the reasoning behind some of the activities that people do. So loitering isn't suspicious. You know, some things that may be alarms to other people are not as alarming when you grew up in that environment. So I think that that's really important. And when you talk about building that trust and relationship, when you have that understanding and when you can speak that common language, then it makes a world of difference in how you engage. But the other thing that I also think is important is when we look at, if you look at the medical field, you have a person-based treatment in the medical field. And I think that we miss that in law enforcement, that we look at the offense and not the victim. And so we went through a phase with the PD where we had a CompStat model. It's very popular throughout the country. And it was very focused on data-driven policing and responding to where we had uptick in activity. But what I will always remind my officers when I was in patrol was that each one of those dots on the map and each one of those incidents not only represents a suspect, it represents a victim. And how do we respond to that victim? And so I can go into that area and look for that suspect, but I know where that victim is, and I can have that repeated contact with that victim. And that's where you're going to build that trust, that follow-up to say, what happened? What happened to my case? Because we don't always circle back and let people know. And that's when they feel as if they're being neglected and their issues aren't being addressed because they never get that feedback circle. And so having that, and we lose that because, like Thad said, the cost for service and the high demand of volume of calls that we respond to, we don't always have time to do that. But if we operate from that premise to begin with, that it's the person-centered approach, then we would have a better chance of building those relationships and having it circle back.
Yeah, that's very poignant. Thank you very much. So we'll keep rolling along. And the next question I have is for Cassandra. And this definitely, I chose this for you based on our conversation yesterday. Share with us what the police department has done and been successful in reaching out to the community and trying to make positive steps towards community relations.
You know, I think that the police department has done a lot of work that I don't think gets a lot of attention. I don't think it gets a lot of highlighting, but we also have to understand that for some individuals, they don't have that relationship. So every district has a huge outreach component. So they have their CLO officers, their community liaison officers, who do a lot of engagement with the block watches, who do events within the community. And so a lot of that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves. But I also would say that some of the things that we have done, that is not the one-of thing, like, oh, we did a thing, you know, like the relationship building types of things are, you know, working in the school systems. One of the things that I did seeing that there was a deficit of females in the profession, we worked with the Girl Scouts, and one of the programs they had was Camp Hero. And Camp Hero was a partnership between the police department, the fire department, MATC, and MPS actually joined in with the Girl Scouts so that we could get young ladies involved in first responder professions. And so in the area, again, like I said, representation matters. In the area where we see a deficit of females, we definitely wanted to do that outreach to provide them with some insight into how that profession might work in their lives. So just different things like that, where we go out and we do the one-ups, we do the night outs, we do those parties and events that we host, but we have strong relationships with our faith-based community, but continuing every opportunity we can to build those relationships ongoing and not just an event.
Yeah, and you know, as a community organizer, we do the same thing, and I think that's what we all need to realize is you've got to talk to the people that we're trying to help. We have to not talk; we have to listen. We have to understand what the needs are, and definitely, as Cassandra said, it's per person. It's not a collective. And it's a hard thing to do with limited resources. We're in the same boat with that type of thing. So you've got to be creative and willing to just take a little extra time, which can be very, very hard, but it can make a huge impact for everybody. And the follow-up, I agree, is tremendous. It's definitely tremendous. Stuart, Thad, any other thoughts about things going well in our community with the police department?
Thad, you're on mute.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
All right. Well, there are a variety of things that actively goes on within the police department where it really boils down to the officers. And I can say this just based on my experience on the streets early in my career. My partners and I worked together, two of us, we were a three-man squad that worked together almost on a daily basis for the basis of almost 7 years in the same location. And we established a indelible imprint with the community that we serve. And one of my squad areas was the old Jeffrey Dahmer neighborhood. So to think about how policing and was in that time, in that era, that a lot of people had distrust over the police and the way they were handling the Jeffrey Dahmer situation, it was hard to bridge a gap with those individual people. And that was it was a high crime. At that time, it was noted to be a high crime area, and it's right on the edge of Marquette University campus. And one of the reasons that Avenues West was set up was specifically to address the concerns and safety of the Marquette students, but also to introduce community-oriented policing as a means to kind of contact those people who had a high distrust of police post the Jeffrey Dahmer situation. So what happened with us was unique is the fact that just like Cassandra said, and just like Stu said, when you have people who are not only familiar with the community, but are representative of the community that they serve, and has an interest to engage those individual people on a personal level. I'm not as a call for service. Hi, I'm the police. You call 911. Here I am. But when you're driving down the street and somebody's, playing music on the street corner, and you get out your car, and you start dancing with them. Those type of engagements are the kind of engagements that show that you are just like anybody else. And a lot of people fail to realize that police officers are actually people just like they are. The ideal of is when you put the uniform on, it's not the uniform that changes the person. The person is who they are. And if they change because they put the uniform on, then they're in the wrong. So what I'm saying is that in order for us to engage and for police officers to engage with the community, we have to remain who we are, people who represent people and people who reflect the people that we serve. It's not a power trip of authority, and police officers have tremendous authority, but it's not about exhorting your authority when you meet somebody or you approach somebody. It's about allowing yourself to be yourself when you engage with people. And I think it starts with the individual. So we can all mandate changes of policies, but if it's not in your heart to either have a compassion of concern for somebody, just like in the recent situation with George Floyd, if you look at the officer's eyes, just look at his eyes, there's no humanity toward humanity in regards to that officer's treatment of that particular individual. That has nothing to do with his policy. That has nothing to do with the police department, the people who work with, or the training he had. That's an individual's hatred or indiscriminate care for his own humanity. If we're able to do that as police officers toward the community, care about the community that we serve, I think we can solve the issue with community-oriented policing in one stroke. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Stu, any other thoughts? Nope. Okay.
No, none.
Yeah, no. And I think as I was putting this together and as I tried to introduce, we really do need to just start having dialogue and getting to know each other and understand that we are all individuals and we can get along, and we need to remove all the barriers that are in place right now. So, and this is exactly where we're getting started. So thank you all for joining us. All right, Stu, a question for you. What can communities do to support, in support of the police in the area of quality life? And I will say that comes from Keith. And in regard to, we know that our officers now don't need to live in the city, and that we do have a city that's divisive, segregated, and that is a quality of life issue. And what ways can we help our police officers want to be more part of our community and stay engaged in Milwaukee?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that I would say in this, kind of this tumultuous time is for the community not to demonize the police in general, right? I think the system will identify and is identifying bad officers, and those bad officers will be addressed. But I think you have to engage with the police. You have to find forums in which you can talk. And I think that's it's through. I've been a part of some of Chief Morales's public sessions that he's held. With mixed review. But I think that you're never going to find a perfect situation. You have to try and try and try again. It's one of the things that if you can engage towards the middle and stay away from the extremes, you're not going to agree on everything. And I think if people feel that they have to come to a situation where they're going to agree with everything the police do, or the police is going to agree with everything that the public wants, you're never going to find satisfaction. But if you can find certain common things that you can agree upon and use that as a starting point for the relationships between the police and the community, I think you'll start to see little victories, and the little victories will just snowball and become larger victories. So I think engaging, not demonizing, and looking for ways to be supportive, I think is a way that is, in my mind, is a path forward for us as a community, and the kind of things that I would certainly, if I were a police officer, I would want the community to engage with me, and I would want to find ways that I could communicate and make sure they knew who I was.
Yeah. Cassandra or Thad, anything else you may want to offer?
I'll jump in on this one. When it comes to what the community can do to help out is, I think, quite frank, like literally help out. What I'm looking for is, if we encourage, kind of what Stu said, in vilifying law enforcement, and just that profession right now has quite a big black eye on it. And if you tell someone, most officers won't tell you that they are an officer. There isn't that sense of pride because there is this negative stigma associated with law enforcement. And so I think that narrative needs to change. That one of the things that we hear, and I talk about this, I've already said it here, representation matters. And people say the police need to look like the community they police. But it's difficult to do that when we don't have the application pool willing to sign up for that task. And so that's something that we have an opportunity here in front of us to really quite literally change the face of law enforcement and get people engaged who look like the community that's being policed. And so for even those who don't live in the area, because the residency situation is a done deal, that's pretty much resolved, but having that exposure. And so when I left Milwaukee back in April, I want to say that our Black population on the department was only 17%. And for females, it was only 16%. And so then if you do the overlap, there were only 4% of Black females. And so we just did not have a lot of representation. And so I really would like to see our community encouraging our members to join and make those changes internally. Like, if we want to change the way that something is done, roll up our sleeves and get in there and do the work, because we can change that narrative internally, and we can influence those policies by being a part of that conversation and not waiting to be invited to the table, but stepping up and taking our place there.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. So I'll ask one more question. We can, like all of you to address, which we've kind of done anyway, but I think it's been very nice to have each one of you bring some additional comments and then really complement each other's comments as well. So last question that we will go through, and I will prep Stu that you can go first. So what is your hope and vision for the future of Milwaukee, and just really just that for Milwaukee?
I would love to see a Milwaukee where the things we've talked about this afternoon, where the community does respond to the call of being involved and engaged, and looks to be a part of the department rather than just looking at the department. So join the department, be a part of the change. I think that would be great if we could see more representation on the department from the neighborhood, from the people who are being policed. I'd like to see, as I talked about before, that we find community representatives who are not vilifying the police or not demonizing the police, recognizing that it is a very difficult job. You go from a lot of different extremes. I often remember that law enforcement was described to me as I got started as 80% boredom and 20% terror. So I think that it's one of those things where it's a difficult job. Appreciate the fact that it's a difficult job, but engage. So I'd like to see a community where we've got good opportunities for the police and the community to get together and a forum to discuss and talk through we may not agree, like I said before, we may not agree on things, but at least find some commonality, some things we can agree on, and help the police. Be a part of your neighborhood. Be a part of your neighborhood watch. Make sure that, a safe neighborhood is a neighborhood that people want to be a part of. be a part of that. So those are the kind of things I'd like to see evolving in Milwaukee to get away from this sense of division and really more of a unified approach.
Thank you very much. Thad, can you share your thoughts on what your hope and vision for Milwaukee?
Well, yes. Quintessentially, Milwaukee has to be a better Milwaukee. We could talk about improved police and community relationships. The police and community relationships is only as good as the relationships that the community has with itself. And the problem with Milwaukee is that Milwaukee has systemic issues. And you can change the police, but you're not changing the problems. So when we're going around trying to address societal ills as a department and division, we're just basically being a Band-Aid on a tourniquet situation. Milwaukee suffers from its endemic problems with segregation as being the most highly hyper-segregated city in the nation. African Americans as a whole, which is actually, at this time, Milwaukee is a majority minority city, and it ranks in the top 10 of every socio-economic ill in America. And these issues have to be attained and addressed across the board. There's too much of a plurality of Milwaukee. There's a north side of Milwaukee, there's a south side of Milwaukee, there's a suburban side of Milwaukee, there's the east side and the west side. And we all have to realize that we occupy 98 square miles together near a great lake. And it's a great place to be, but it's not going to be a great place to be if there's divisions that go on that perpetuate this alienation between racial groups, community groups, socioeconomic groups, the police versus the community as a whole. We have to solve the problems that affect us all in order to be a better police state or community where we can serve and actually protect the people that we serve. So I hope Milwaukee will address those issues. The politicians, the economic powers that be, try to create the opportunities that are there. It's just not giving anything to anybody, but making the system an even platform where people can achieve economic and societal equality, where they then no longer have to depend upon violence and just despair as a means of their culture that continues to exasperate these issues, where uprising, anger, and resentment goes on, and we burn our communities down, and we need the police more, and we're angry at the police. And it's just a vicious cycle that needs to stop. So to answer the question succinctly, I just hope Milwaukee will learn to get past its past and create a new presence where it's all inclusive to everybody in the community, so that we as representative law enforcement can feel proud and feel safe to serve and protect the community that we serve. That's it.
Thank you. And Cassandra, we'll let you wrap this one up on your hope and vision for Milwaukee.
Absolutely. Thad hit it on the head. You know, Milwaukee has an ugly past, and it's definitely hasn't left us, so we're still struggling with it. But we do need to be more inclusive and address those issues that we see throughout the community. But what we can do here with this opportunity that we have in front of us, with such a push for police reform and the conversations around defunding police, is really sit down with the community and prioritize what they're asking. And so, as Thad talked about at the beginning of the conversation, was the demand on officers. Law enforcement is that first responder, literally that first line of government for almost everything. Your dog is loose, your lights are out, you're calling the police. Mm-hmm. And so if we look at in terms of how do we better utilize these resources that we have, so that we can put time back into the community, so we can go back into those relationship building parameters, then that's something that we could sit down with the community as we do this reform and say, what are your priorities? What are the things that are important to you? And so when we talk about quality of life, you know, that's a huge issue for me, because whose quality of life are we looking at? And so if I'm an outsider coming into this community and I'm going to tell you what your quality of life should be, that in and of itself is that we're at a deficit. And we're not going to make progress. So we need to sit down and say, what are the priorities? While there are things in the utopia, we would love for there to be clean streets and quiet music and green space and all of those things. But it's difficult to ask for those things when you don't have basic health care. or you have economic issue and you don't have secure housing. So we have to really look at where are we as a community really wanting to have our law enforcement involved, and do we need law enforcement enforcing littering when we have so many other things that are so much more important. So looking at those things and really sitting down, I would like to see that conversation happen where we actually ask the community, what do you want of your police? Because if we come in and we tell you what we're going to do for you and to you, then we're occupying and we're not helping. So we have to have that input from the community. And then that way, as we have people, like I said, come in and change the face physically of what law enforcement look like, we have a narrative that actually aligns with the needs of the community.
Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra. I appreciate everyone's responses and time and effort. And I mean, the four of us have not met until today. And it's amazing how I think we will all say there's a common theme with all the comments and hopes and beliefs that actions that need to be taken in order to heal our city and our communities and move forward to a more equitable and happier community. So we do have some questions, I believe, Miss Brittany. So let's throw those out.
All right. So our first question is, do Milwaukee police have resident requirements?
No. I think the residency right now, there's a parameter around the city. I believe it's 15 miles around the city, but they do not have to live within the city proper.
Thank you.
I'm muted. It's Friday. So our next question is, if you had the opportunity to create a budget for MPD, what would it look like and what types of programs would they add?
Anybody want to take a stab at that? Your dream budget.
I'd go to the captain first.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
yeah,
now
yeah,
we're
that's a
now we're
capital
ladies
question.
first. You know what? I think that what people really need to understand when it comes, Milwaukee Police Department has a huge budget. You know, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure they're out there and easy to obtain. But the vast majority of that budget is,
$357 million.
there you go. The vast majority of that, probably 90% of that is in personnel. So there isn't a lot of wiggle room when it comes to operations and equipment. So it really comes down to how many police do you want and what you want those officers doing. So when you're looking at that huge number that I just threw out, how many officers do you want? And that's what it's going to cost you. So ideally, what a budget looks like is having an opportunity for those officers. Maybe we won't need as many if they're not doing such a heavy lift, if they're not pulled in so many different directions. But that's the conversation we need to have. Years ago, and Thad will remember this, we used to have a call called the C19, where if an alarm went off in your house, we went because your alarm went off. And it could have been your dog, it could have been, you know, the wind. And there actually was a sub call for weather alone. Your alarm was set off by your weather. And I remember when the department moved to eliminate that call and said law enforcement is not going to respond to that alarm call because of the vast majority of those calls were false alarms. So we made that deep. It was a big commitment, and a lot of people were afraid that, oh, they're not coming to our houses being broken into. We're leaving us out there. But the reality is the vast majority of those calls were really not an efficient use of our time. So looking at that in terms of how much time that freed up for officers not having to respond to those types of calls, and looking at all the types of calls that we respond to. Do I need to respond to the neighbor trouble about who shoveled snow in whose driveway? Do I need to respond to you hit my garbage can? You know, those kind of calls. What are we responding to? Or even now that we see this popularity of people calling the police for non-police issues because they didn't agree with the way someone was behaving. how are we really utilizing those? And that's how we're going to cut the budget, is if we utilize our officers more efficiently, then we may not need as many. But as long as we continue to operate in the fashion that we do, it's a manpower issue. There's not a lot of money left over when it comes to other training, equipment, and things of that nature, because it is taken up in cost and benefits.
If I can add a little side note to what Cassandra said, a lot of people fail to realize when they talk about defunding law enforcement agencies, they don't tell you in descriptive form what they actually mean. So it's easy for somebody to say to defund the police department mean to get rid of the police department, and people go into a panic. But one of the things about policing that a lot of people don't realize is we do a lot more than just arrest people and put them in jail. Primary job of police department is to be the mediator, the counselor, the psychologist, I mean, everything, whatever you can imagine, we do those things. So early in my career, I remember having to talk with the corporate counsel of Mount Sinai Hospital on describing what was considered to be Chapter 7, which was what is eligible for a person to be conveyed to Milwaukee County Mental Health. And the way the hospital used to use the Milwaukee Police Department is that they would call us to Chapter 7, which we had the ability to create an emergency detention on somebody, to take them out of the hospital and then transfer them to another area where we would take hours just trying to screen these individual people to determine whether it was lawful for us to actually commit them under Chapter 7. Now, in a case in point like that, I remember having a conversation with one of the lead physicians, and I was asking him, I'm like, how am I, a police officer, making a determination based upon the psychological needs of an individual, and because you called me to come here and ED this person, which is the Chapter 7 of them, I am not obligated to do this. Now that this is my patrol area, I find myself doing this 2 and 3 times a day. And if I'm doing this 2 and 3 times a day, it's taking me at least an hour and a half time per day every time I do it. Half of my shift was running shuttle from Mount Sinai to county mental health. So when they talk about defunding, and a lot of people talk about the funds that the police department receive, which is generally basically going to salary, that 10%, whether it's 3.7 million or whether it's $10 million appropriated to the police department for whatever little safe and sound program or something that they can throw a couple of dollars to, the true relationship of the police department and the monies that are spent is because we are doing things that other people should really be doing. We should not be acting as advocates for certain things that should be handled by the community. So when we talk about defunding the police, you just want to take away even more from what we've already strained in regards to what we're doing to begin with. And everybody's just is just fragile. They don't know which way to go. And again, our position is that we do more than just arrest people. We counsel people. We tend to, personal issues, all of these kind of things. And unless those things are defined within either a job description, which it shouldn't be, but if it's not looked at specifically, we can do ourselves a disservice as first responders coming to people and as agencies that depend upon those same first responders to serve the community that they work to protect. So it's a catch-22 situation, but that's one of the problems that we're having, is that police officers are being respected and being dependent upon to do things that they just shouldn't actually be doing. That's my point.
Okay, so our next question is there any kind of technology or any kind of proven technology or equipment that is on the market that MPD is currently not utilizing that you believe will make a difference in how the community is being policed? The person who submitted the question says that they have heard a national conversation about removing police from making traffic stops and shifting the responsibility to camera-based program. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, and I will say, if you all want to do a quick answer, and then we'll wrap up because I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. This is generally a 30-minute conversation, and we extended it to 45 because we knew we had a topic that was well worth every minute. So we'll answer that, and then the remaining questions, I will make sure we can copy those and then maybe send that out. We can either conference call or just send them out to y'all and give a answer via email and make sure we get answers back to the folks, which is one of the things we just talked about, is making sure we loop back around and let people know what's happening. So anyone aware of some of these new ideas?
I can't say that I'm familiar with the camera-based traffic stops, and I'm not quite sure how I would feel about that. But I do think the better question is to look at what laws are on the books. You know, what are we actually, law enforcement enforces the laws that are on the books. So if you want to limit contact, go back and look at the laws that are on the books. So what are we enforcing when we do traffic enforcement? And so some of these things like headlight violations have been revisited, you know, license plate registration stickers have been revisited. Some of these things, that may not need to be an enforcement issue, it's more of a financial issue. We can look at some of those things, but I don't know about the depersonalizing those contacts. I think it's just what is the quality of the contacts and why are we having those contacts is a better conversation, I think, to have.
Good point. And I think the only other thing I see from that is the reckless driving that we do have in Milwaukee. And at this point, my understanding is we would need state law to be able to put cameras on our stoplights for people that are not doing a good job with adhering to the law as far as safety and going through red lights and whatnot. So I think that's an example of opportunity to help folks do the right thing because it's another way to monitor, but we'll see. So again, I want to say a big thank you to Stu, to Thad, to Cassandra. This has really been an honor for me. I've learned a heck of a lot, and I'm very proud to be able to have been part of elevating this conversation. And Cassandra and I have made a pact. I will make sure to help her out in the future because she has some goals that she wants to achieve as she's now in a new position and is seeing where we are at in Milwaukee. And I think we all agree that this is important and we need to keep the conversation going. So thank you again. And I appreciate everyone's time logging in. We will replay it again, and Brittany's raising her hand. So you'll be able to see it on Facebook Live. And then we do post it on our website, or sometimes this is still evolving. So we have opportunity to share it. And then I would like to definitely see some of these ideas move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation.
Before we all go anywhere, everybody stay for a second. Number one announcement to make is, as of July, for all of our regular webinar attendees, we will be moving our webinars to Wednesdays at noon. So they will be posting. People will get the text messages and the emails still, but I just wanted that to be on everybody's radar. And next week we won't have a webinar because it is the 4th of July. Everybody gets a vacation day. Secondly, if I can just have our presenters stay for a second, also Ms. Shantae and Ms. Valerie, because I think we can just answer their questions really quickly. If you're okay with that.
If that works. And if you can't, go ahead and sign off, and then we'll connect a little by early next week. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So their questions, because they were really short questions, which is why I wanted us to get them answered right away. One question was, how do we leverage, I'm assuming near West Side partners or community organizations to impact police reform?
Can you ask that one more time?
Mm-hmm. How do we leverage community organizations to impact police reform?
I would say be a host to these kind of conversations. create spaces that are neutral, that people can come together and share this information that they may not otherwise had opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Create the dialogue.
Right, right. I agree.
All right.
I would agree.
Okay, so our last question is, do you think that changing language like block watches to neighborhood associations could change the community and police dynamics?
Sure. Anything in the context of how you describe something. Again, police aren't the ones who come up with I don't believe they're the ones that come up with the descriptions of block watches versus calling it something else. I think that's probably the organization, but anything that I guess takes away the stigma of they're watching you, or there's some kind of aggressive action, and then something soft like a neighborhood association. I certainly think there wouldn't be anything wrong with that.
I agree with Sue said. I think people, however you self-identify, if you want to be a neighborhood association, then we should respect that.
One thing I would add in regards to how you can actually have an impact to leverage yourself is to create a dialogue and invite the people in the neighborhood to come down, and you basically have to educate them. You have to bring them up to level as to understanding the services that they not only need in the community, but the services that they deserve in the community as presented by police departments. And then once you do those things and you understand the policies and procedures as to why certain police agencies or certain police officers do the things that they do, then you have a basis of understanding how police reform can either work or not work. So by you just saying reform, you have to know what you're going to change in order to change it. So if you don't know what is going on, how can you reform what you don't know? I would say create a base of information, become learned and skilled about the policies and procedures that affect you in your neighborhood. Bring your neighbors or your community people together to educate them on the same level that you are trying to present, and then go and become a part of speaking to the Fire and Police Commission about the things that you want. Because you can talk to somebody who's a supervisor on assignment, or you can talk to a captain who may be running in a district, but the bottom line is that the buck doesn't stop with them. It has to go up a chain of command, whether it has to get to with an inspector or go up the chain to a commander or assistant chief or chief. You got about 4 lines of chain of command. And then when it gets to the chief of police, really it's not his call. He has to get approval by the Fire and Police Commission to make those changes. So when I say you can go and establish a platform in which you want to leverage your impact by understanding, again, what the policies and procedures are, how to make those reforms, allow your constituents to know that they have a voice, and go sit in on a Fire and Police Commission meeting and then express those things. And I think that's how it would work down the chain of command. Work from the top down, not from the bottom up.
Thank you for taking the time to answer those questions for us. I'm done, Barb. I'm done.
She says that all the time. So again, I can't say how appreciative I am that you were able to do this, and that the cohesiveness of this team just was amazing. And as I said, I think it really goes to the fact that it's a common theme that we all agree that we need to move forward, and there's some actions that we can all take. And I'm proud to know that we were part of making that happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, Ed. Nice to meet you.